He threw the dinner plate into the sink so hard it cracked straight down the middle. Rachel stood at the kitchen table without moving, the hotel receipt still open in her hand, and Daniel spun around and pointed at her with a fury she had never seen before. "You want the truth," his voice was shaking. "The truth is you have nothing. You are nothing without me." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see exactly how little he was afraid of her. Then he smiled, cold, certain, absolute. "So leave." "I dare you." He said it like a man who had already counted all the exits and locked every single one. Rachel Whitmore had learned somewhere around year 4 of her marriage that the loudest moments in a relationship are never the most dangerous ones. It was the quiet ones you had to watch. The Sunday morning when Daniel forgot her birthday but remembered to call his business partner twice before noon. The dinner party where he introduced her to his colleagues as my wife, not by name, as if she were a feature of the house rather than a person who lived in it. The night she stayed up until 2 in the morning organizing his tax documents, and he walked past her without a word, poured himself a glass of water, and went to bed. Those were the moments that had been slowly, methodically hollowing her out from the inside. But Rachel didn't talk about those moments, she filed them. Cataloged them the same way she cataloged everything else in her professional life, with precision, with patience, and without any wasted emotion. Because Rachel Whitmore was not a woman who fell apart easily. She was a senior financial analyst at Meridian Consulting Group, one of the most respected firms in Austin, Texas. She had spent 15 years learning how to read numbers the way other people read faces, instinctively, deeply, and with an attention to detail that made her colleagues both admire and fear her. She could look at a spreadsheet and know within 4 minutes whether someone was hiding something. She could trace a discrepancy back to its origin the way a surgeon traces a nerve methodically, without panic, without emotion getting in the way. That skill had made her exceptional at her job, and for 12 years she had turned it completely off when she walked through her own front door. She told herself it was love, she told herself it was trust. She told herself that a marriage wasn't a financial audit, and Daniel deserved the benefit of the doubt she extended to no one else. But the truth she had been carefully not looking at for longer than she cared to admit, was that she'd been afraid of what she would find. The night everything changed was a Thursday in late October. It had been an unremarkable day at work. She'd closed a client review, sat through 2 meetings, and driven home on autopilot, thinking about nothing more serious than whether she'd remember to take chicken out of the freezer. Daniel had texted her around 4 to say he'd be late. A construction site meeting ran over, he said, which happened often enough that she didn't question it. She got home, she made dinner for 1, she watched 40 minutes of television she wouldn't remember the next day. And then, because Daniel's dry cleaning had been sitting in the entryway for 3 days, and she was tired of stepping around the garment bag, she picked it up to hang it properly in the closet. The jacket pocket was open, she wasn't looking for anything. That's the part she would think about later, in the long, quiet hours when the truth was fully assembled, and she was hussy with it. She wasn't looking. She wasn't suspicious, she was just a woman putting away a jacket. The receipt was folded in quarters, the kind of small, careful folding that suggests the person doing it wasn't thinking about hiding it so much as simply not wanting to look at it anymore. She almost put it back, she almost did, but some part of her, the part that had spent 15 years, the things other people didn't want, found unfolded it anyway. The Blackwood Grand Hotel, Dallas, Texas, 2 nights. A suite. The dates were from the previous month, a weekend when Daniel had told her he was visiting Marcus Webb, his oldest business partner, to go over the financing for a new commercial development project. Rachel stared at the receipt for a long time. She was not a woman who cried easily, but she felt something shift in her chest, not breaking exactly, more like the final settling of a foundation that had been quietly cracking for years. Like she had been waiting for this, like some part of her had always known it was coming and had simply been bracing. She refolded the receipt, she put it in her own pocket. She finished making dinner. When Daniel came home at 8:30, she had food on the table and a glass of wine poured for each of them, and she sat across from him and talked about her day in a calm, measured voice, while every analytical instinct she possessed quietly shifted into a gear she had never used on her own life before. She watched him, she listened, she stored everything. He was relaxed, that was the first thing she noted. Not the careful relaxation of a man hiding something come to large, the genuine, comfortable ease of a man who believed he was not in danger. He talked about the construction meeting. He complained about a subcontractor. He asked if she'd caught the weather forecast for the weekend. He was not afraid of her. That told her everything she needed to know about how invisible she had become. She waited 3 days before she mentioned the hotel. Not because she was afraid, because she needed to understand her own position completely before she walked into a confrontation. She needed to know what she was dealing with before Daniel knew she was dealing with anything at all. She spent those 3 days with her eyes wide open in a way they hadn't been in years. She thought about the conversations she'd half listened to, the business calls she'd heard fragments of. These evenings guests had stayed late at the office with such increasing frequency that she'd stopped tracking them. She thought about the way his business had scaled in the last 3 years faster than she would have expected, faster than the market conditions entirely justified. She thought about her mother. Eleanor Whitmore had died 4 years ago, leaving Rachel an inheritance that was, by most standards, substantial. $340,000, accumulated over a lifetime of careful saving, by a woman who had grown up with very little and learned to hold every dollar like it was the last one she'd ever see. Eleanor had trusted banks and she'd trusted her children, and she had not, in the end, trusted the concept of the future. She'd kept meticulous records of every investment, every account, every decision. Rachel had trusted Daniel to manage that inheritance. She had been grieving, she had been overwhelmed. And Daniel had told her gently, reasonably, with the patient confidence of a man who understood finances, that the best thing to do was reinvest it into the business, where it could grow protected from market volatility, where it would build them a future Eleanor would have been proud of. Rachel had signed the paperwork. She hadn't read it carefully enough. She understood that now. She understood it in the particular hollow way you understand something you've been not understanding for a very long time. On the third evening, Daniel came home to find Rachel sitting at the dining room table with a glass of water and no expression on her face, and she said, very quietly, "Tell me about the trip to Dallas." Daniel sat down. He put his keys on the table. He looked at her with the practiced patience of a man who had rehearsed this or something like it in his head before. "What about it? The hotel," she said, "the Blackwood Grand." A beat just won, almost nothing, but Rachel saw it. That was a business expense. Marcus and I were going over the development contract. "You know that. The suite was charged to your personal card," Rachel said. "Not the company card." Another pause, this one slightly longer. "I used the wrong card. I meant to file it as reimbursable." "You know how disorganized I get on trips." Rachel looked at him. "You've never once used the wrong card in 15 years of running your business." Daniel's expression shifted. Not to guilt, she had been prepared for guilt, prepared for defensiveness, even for tears. What she had not been prepared for was the irritation. The way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes went flat, the way he sat back in his chair like a man who had been inconvenienced. "Rachel, I'm not going to sit here and be interrogated in my own house. I'm asking you a question about a hotel receipt. You're accusing me. I haven't accused you of anything." "You're implying I found a receipt in your jacket pocket," she said. She kept her voice completely level. "I would like an explanation." What happened next was not what she expected. Daniel didn't confess. He didn't deflect. He didn't even try to construct a more convincing lie. Instead, he did what Rachel had never seen him do in 12 years of marriage. He got ugly. "You know what your problem is." He stood up from the table, and there was something in the way he moved, not threatening, not physically, but expansive, deliberate, the way a man moves when he wants to fill the space you're in. "You have spent so many years looking for problems in other people's accounts that you can't look at anything in your own life without seeing fraud. You want to find something wrong, this is what you do." Rachel said nothing. "I've been carrying this family for years," he continued. "I've built something from nothing. From literally nothing, and you sit here in this house with your steady paycheck and your benefits and your little title on your business card, and you think you understand what I deal with every single day. You have no idea." "Tell me where the money went, Daniel," he blinked. It was such a specific question that it caught him off guard. "What money?" The suite was $1,700 for 2 nights. The personal card charge was $2,300 total, which means there were additional expenses. Restaurant charges, room service, maybe flowers, I'm not guessing. "I'm asking." Daniel stared at her, and in that stare, Rachel saw something she had not expected to find, not guilt, not fear, but calculation. The look of a man re-evaluating how much the person across from him actually knew. That look told her more than any confession would have. "You're paranoid," he said finally. "You've always been paranoid. I'd like to see the expense report you filed for that weekend. I don't owe you an audit of my life. That's my mother's money in that company, Daniel." The silence that followed was the longest one yet. Daniel looked at her. Something flickered behind his eyes: surprise, recalculation, something she couldn't entirely name, and then it was gone, replaced by an expression she had seen before. The smooth, controlled composure of a man who had decided to end a conversation he wasn't winning. "If you're unhappy," he said, "you should leave." He said it quietly, almost gently, the way she'd see something you believed was true and harmless. "If this marriage isn't enough for you, if I'm not enough for you, then leave. Nobody's keeping you here." And then he smiled. That was the part she would remember long after everything else faded. The smile, not cruel exactly, but certain. The smile of a man who had just offered a door he was absolutely confident she would never walk through. Rachel looked at her husband. She looked at the smile. And she felt, for the first time in a very long time, something clarify inside her like a lens coming into focus. She didn't say anything. She picked up her glass of water, finished it, rinsed it in the sink, and went upstairs. Daniel called after her once, a half-hearted Rachel, the kind of word that wasn't quite an apology and wasn't quite a question. She didn't answer. She closed the bedroom door behind her, sat on the edge of the bed in the dark, and for exactly 11 minutes, she knew because she watched the clock, she allowed herself to feel the full weight of what she was looking at. 12 years, a mother's inheritance, a man who had just offered her freedom like it was a dare. After 11 minutes, she opened her laptop and Rachel Whitmore went to work. She started where she always started, with what she knew for certain. Daniel's construction company, Whitmore Development LLC, had been incorporated 7 years ago with an initial investment of $420,000. She remembered that number. She had signed the documents. She had believed at the time that her portion of that initial investment was $120,000 from their joint savings. She had never questioned where the rest came from. She questioned it now. She accessed the financial records. She had legal access to not the company's full books, but the joint accounts, the household accounts, the investment portfolio she had signed on to over the years. She went slowly, methodically, the way she'd been trained. She didn't rush. She didn't let anger push her past details she might need later. She found in the first hour was enough to keep her awake until 3 in the morning. There were transfers she didn't recognize, not large ones, nothing so obvious that it would raise an immediate flag in a casual review. 15,000 here, 22,000 there. Transfers to an entity called W Consulting Group appeared in the records with regularity starting about 5 years ago. She had never heard of HW Consulting Group. She wrote down every transaction number, every date, every amount. She cross-referenced them against the household expenses. She remembered the renovation they'd done on the kitchen 3 years ago, the cars they'd bought, the vacations they'd taken. Some of the transfers corresponded to real expenses. But not all of them, not even close to all of them. She kept going. Around midnight, she found the first thread that connected to her mother's estate. It was buried. She would not have found it without knowing what she was looking for, without the specific patience that comes from years of professional practice. The original investment from Eleanor Whitmore's estate, the $340,000, had been processed through a trust account, then transferred in segments into Whitmore Development's capital holdings. That part was documented. That part had Rachel's signature on it. But 18 months after those funds were deposited into the company's capital account, a portion of them, $160,000, had been redesignated. Not removed, redesignated, reclassified as a shareholder loan from a private individual rather than a capital investment from Rachel. Which meant that on paper, Rachel's ownership stake in the company was significantly smaller than she had believed. And the private individual the loan was attributed to, HW Consulting Group. Rachel sat very still for a long time. She thought about the name HW. The initials meant nothing to her immediately, but she knew they would. She had learned over her career that people who hide money rarely hide it under completely unrecognizable names. There was always a connection, always a thread. She didn't pull it that night. She wasn't ready. She closed her laptop, lay down on top of the covers in her clothes, and stared at the ceiling while Daniel slept 3 feet away from her, breathing slowly, completely unaware that the ground beneath him had just shifted. She did not sleep. She was not angry, not yet, or not in the way anger usually presents. She felt something colder than anger, something more purposeful. The same feeling she got in the early stages of a major audit, when she began to understand that what she was looking at was not a mistake but a decision. A series of decisions, made deliberately over time by someone who believed they were smarter than the person who would eventually be reading the records. She had caught people like that before. She was very good at it. In the morning, she got up before Daniel, showered, dressed, made coffee, and went to work exactly on time. Daniel texted her at 9:15. Last night got heated. I'm sorry, let's talk tonight. Rachel read the text twice. She noted the specific grammar of the apology, the passive construction, got heated, which assigned responsibility to the abstract atmosphere rather than to either of them. The lack of any specific acknowledgement of what had been said. The word talk, which in Daniel's vocabulary typically meant I will explain myself until you agree with me. She typed back, okay, and then she called the one person she trusted more than anyone in Austin, Texas. Her name was Vivian Cole, and she was one of the best divorce attorneys in the state. Rachel had met Vivian 6 years ago through a professional networking event. They had become friends in the careful way that two extremely capable women sometimes do, not immediately intimate, not effusive, but deeply respectful of each other. The kind of friendship built on a shared understanding that the world required you to be smarter than it expected. Rachel had attended Vivian's events. Vivian had referred clients to Rachel's firm. They had lunch every few months and talked about work and their mothers and the particular frustrations of being taken less seriously than you deserved. Rachel had never called Vivian in a professional capacity. She called her now. Vivian answered on the second ring. Rachel, good morning. I need to understand something, Rachel said. If a spouse's inheritance was redirected into a jointly owned business and then reclassified in the company's records without the spouse's knowledge, what does that look like from a legal perspective? There was a short pause. It looks like several things, Vivian said carefully. Can you come in? I can come in on my lunch break. Come at noon. I'll clear my schedule. Rachel arrived at Vivian's office at 12:03. She spread the documents she had printed that morning across the conference table. Vivian looked at them for a long time without speaking. She was a woman who had seen a great deal, and she had the practiced stillness of someone who had learned not to let her first reaction be her visible one. But Rachel, who was good at reading people, saw the shift in her expression. The particular tightening around the eyes that meant what she was looking at was significant. How long have you been collecting these? Vivian asked finally. Since last night. Vivian looked up. Since last night. I work fast, Rachel said, when I understand what I'm looking at. What you're looking at, Vivian said slowly, assuming these records are accurate, is a reclassification of marital assets without disclosure. If your mother's inheritance was incorporated into the business as a capital investment and you signed documents that effect, then the subsequent reclassification of those funds as a third-party loan changes ownership position without your knowledge or consent. Depending on what that entity is and who controls it, this could constitute fraud. Rachel nodded once. She had expected that word. She had been moving toward it for 12 hours. I need to find out who controls HW Consulting Group, she said. I know someone who can run a corporate records search, Vivian said. It'll take a day, maybe two. How soon can you have papers ready to file? Vivian looked at her steadily. You're sure? Rachel thought about the smile. The certain comfortable smile of a man who believed she had nowhere to go. I've never been more sure of anything in my professional life, she said. Then give me 48 hours, Vivian said. And Rachel? She paused, and for a moment the attorney dropped away and just the friend was there, direct and clear-eyed. Whatever you find, don't let him know you're looking. Not yet. The moment he knows you're looking, things will start to move. I know, Rachel said. She drove back to work with the particular focused calm of a woman, set something in motion that could not now be stopped. That evening, Daniel was waiting for her. He had cooked dinner. This was not nothing. Daniel cooked approximately 4 times a year, and each time he did, it was accompanied by a quality of performance that told you the occasion was significant to him. He'd made pasta, he'd opened a good bottle of wine. He'd set the table the way she liked it. I've been thinking about last night, he said. Me too, said Rachel. She sat down, she let him pour the wine. She watched him with the same careful, pleasant non-naturality she had learned to maintain in professional settings when she was waiting for someone to reveal more than they intended to. I was harsh, Daniel said. I didn't mean what I said. About leaving, which part didn't you mean? He hesitated. I don't want you to leave, you know that, do I? Rachel, he put his fork down. I know you're upset. I know the hotel thing, I know how it looked, but I need you to trust me. She looked at him across the table. Trust was such an interesting word. She had spent 12 years trusting him. She had trusted him with her mother's money. She had trusted him with her time and her energy and the small daily surrenders that accumulate over years into something so large you can no longer see where they started. I trust you, Daniel, she said, and she watched the relief move across his face, and she filed it, and she said nothing more about the hotel, and nothing more about HW Consulting Group, and nothing more about Vivian Cole. She asked him about his day. He told her. He's more relaxed than she'd wince him in weeks. After dinner, she washed the dishes and he watched television, and the evening proceeded entirely normally, and Daniel went to bed at 10:30 and kissed her forehead and said, "We're okay," in the voice of a man who needed that to be true. Rachel said, I know. She waited until she could hear his breathing slow and deepen. Then she got up, went to the kitchen table, opened her laptop, and kept working. She needed to understand the full picture before she made another move. Because what she had found so far was not the whole story. She could feel it. The way she awed the presence of information that hadn't yet surfaced, like pressure building behind a closed door. The HW Consulting Group thread was going to lead somewhere specific, somewhere she suspected she already knew, and she needed to be prepared for what she found when she got there. More importantly, she needed to understand exactly what she owned. Because when this ended and it was going to end, she was clear-eyed about that now, clear, in a way she hadn't allowed herself to be in a very long time. She was not going to walk away from what belonged to her. Not her mother's money, not her 12 years of contribution to a household, to a business, to a life. Not $1 of it. By the time she went to bed that night, she had identified 7 additional transactions that she could not account for through legitimate business expenses. She had cross-referenced 3 years of company growth against industry benchmarks. Sensible had consistently outperformed the market in ways that, under normal circumstances, would require either exceptional skill or an unusual source of capital. She had begun to sketch the shape of something that was larger and more deliberate than a hotel receipt. The next morning, Vivian's paralegal called with preliminary findings on HW Consulting Group. Rachel listened to the information in her car, in the parking garage at her office, with the engine still running. She listened without speaking until the very end, and then she said, "Say that name again." The paralegal repeated it. Rachel sat with it for a long moment. Lauren Hayes, HW Consulting Group, Hayes Lauren, the initials reverse, the name split. Simple enough that it was almost elegant, obvious enough once you knew to look that it was almost insulting. Lauren Hayes was 29 years old. She had a business administration degree from the University of Texas. She had been employed by Whitmore Development LLC for the past 4 years in a role described on the company's organizational chart as Business Development Associate. She was also, according to the corporate filing for HW Consulting Group, the sole registered owner of the company. The same company that held on paper a controlling loan position over $160,000 of money that had originally belonged to Eleanor Whitmore. Rachel thanked the paralegal. She sat in her car for 3 more minutes. She thought about Daniel's smile, the certainty in it. The complete, comfortable certainty of a man who had arranged the world around himself so carefully that he genuinely could not imagine it falling. She thought about her mother, who had kept every dollar she had ever saved because she understood, in the bone-deep way people who have lost things understand, that security is not given. It is built, it is protected, and when someone takes it from you, you do not simply accept that. Rachel picked up her phone. She called Vivian. "I have a name," she said. "Tell me," she told her. There was a pause on Vivian's end, brief, professional. "Okay," Vivian said. "Now we file." Vivian Cole's office smelled like strong coffee and old leather, and Rachel had always found it oddly calming, the smell of a place where serious things got handled seriously. She sat across from Vivian the morning after the phone call about Lauren Hayes, and she placed a folder on the table between them without saying. Vivian opened it. She read the first page, then the second. Then she set the folder down, took off her reading glasses, and looked at Rachel with the particular expression of a woman who has spent 20 years in family law and has learned not to be surprised by anything but occasionally still is. "He reclassified your mother's investment as a third-party loan," Vivian said. "And the third party is a company owned by the woman he's been seeing." "That's what the records show, Rachel." Vivian paused. "This isn't just an affair, I know. This is asset concealment. This is potential fraud. If we can establish that the reclassification was made without your knowledge or consent, and it appears we can then your ownership stake in Whitmore Development is significantly larger than what's currently reflected in the company's books." "How much larger?" Vivian looked back at the folder. She ran some numbers quietly, the way attorneys do, when they're calculating in real time and don't want to commit to a figure they can't defend. "Potentially controlling," she said. Rachel sat with that for a moment. Controlling. She had signed into that company as a minority partner, a limited investor, a wife who trusted her husband to manage the details. If the reclassification was reversed, if the court agreed that the funds from her mother's estate had been improperly redesignated, she might hold the larger share. "What do we need?" Rachel asked. "Original documents. The trust paperwork from your mother's estate. Bank records going back as far as you can get them. The corporate filing history for HW Consulting Group. And ideally," Vivian said, "testimony from someone inside the company who can speak to how the reclassification was initiated. Someone other than Daniel. Someone other than Daniel." Rachel nodded slowly. She was already thinking about who that might be. She was already sorting through names, through faces, through every conversation she could recall about Daniel's business operations. She was already, without quite realizing it, building a case. "How long do I have before he suspects something?" she asked. "How is he behaving at home?" "Normal," Rachel said. "He thinks we're fine. He thinks I accepted his apology and moved on." "Then you have a window," Vivian said. "Don't waste it." Rachel did not waste it. She went to work that afternoon and requested a meeting with her firm's senior partner, a sharp and careful man named Gerald Ostrowski, who had known Rachel for 11 years and had never once seen her make an emotional decision. She told Gerald she needed access to certain research tools for a personal financial review, not unusual for someone in her position, and Gerald, who trusted her judgment completely, approved the request without asking specifics. That access gave her what she needed to go deeper. By the end of that first full week, Rachel had assembled a picture that was considerably more complicated than a single hotel receipt. HW Consulting Group had been incorporated 4 years and 3 months ago. That date mattered. She had placed it next to another date, the date Daniel had told her he was bringing on a new business development associate, and the gap between them was 11 days. 11 days after Lauren Hayes became an employee of Whitmore Development, she incorporated HW Consulting Group. Rachel looked at that for a long time. Then she pulled the corporate documents for HW Consulting Group and cross-referenced the registered address. It was a commercial mail forwarding service, the kind of address used by entities that exist primarily on paper. But the phone number on the filing was registered to a real person, and that person was Lauren Hayes, and the phone from some had been in service since the same month the company was incorporated. None of this proved the relationship was romantic. Rachel knew that. She also knew that none of it needed to prove anything on its own. Each thread she found was a thread. The picture would emerge from all of them together. She was still looking, 8 minutes in audience retention hook. On Thursday evening, Rachel was sitting at the kitchen table long after Daniel had gone to bed,
working through a set of company expense reports she had obtained through the joint filing portal they shared for their household accounting.
She had been at it for 2 hours. She was tired in the way that comes from sustained concentration, rather than physical effort, the kind of tired that sits behind your eyes. And then she found something that stopped her completely. A line item in the company's travel expenses from 14 months ago. A conference in San Antonio, legitimate enough, Daniel attended industry events regularly. Hotel charges, meal expenses, the usual categories. But at the bottom of the expense report, filed under miscellaneous client entertainment, was a charge from a jewelry store. $1,840 filed as a business expense. Rachel stared at that number. She thought about the earrings she had mentioned wanting for her birthday, the previous year, simple ones, nothing extravagant, the kind she'd pointed out in a catalog and then mentioned once in passing, hoping he'd noticed. He hadn't gotten them. He'd given her a gift card to a spa she'd gone to exactly once. $1,840, client entertainment. She photographed the document. She added it to the folder she was building. And she felt something change in her chest, not the cold, analytical clarity she had been maintaining carefully for the past week, but something older and rawer than that. Something that had been waiting underneath the professionalism for a very long time. She closed the laptop. She sat in the quiet of the kitchen and let herself feel it for exactly 5 minutes, the way she had allowed herself 11 minutes on the first night. She gave grief its time, and then she pulled it back, because grief was not useful right now, and she had learned, over the course of her life, to be economical with things that cost energy she needed elsewhere. Then she opened the laptop again and kept going. She found the next thread on Friday morning. She had been reviewing the company's vendor list, a list she had legal access to as a recorded co-investor in the business, and she was cross-referencing vendor payments against industry standard rates for the services billed. Most of them were unremarkable, but one vendor name appeared 3 times in an 8-month period, billing for what was described as strategic consulting services, and the amounts were substantial. $40,000, $35,000. $28,000, $103,000 to a vendor called Apex Strategic Partners. Rachel ran a corporate search on Apex Strategic Partners. It was incorporated in Nevada, which was not unusual for holding entities seeking privacy protection. The registered agent was a law firm, which was also not unusual. The beneficial ownership was not publicly disclosed, which was also not unusual and also told her exactly nothing. But the date of incorporation was, Apex Strategic Partners had been incorporated 2 months before HW Consulting Group. 2 companies, 2 dates, a woman named Lauren Hayes at the center of one, and Rachel now suspected connected to the other. She called Vivian. I need a forensic accountant, Rachel said. Someone who can follow corporate structures across multiple entities. I have exactly one person I trust for this, Vivian said. His name is Paul Mara. He's expensive. Book him, Rachel said. Rachel, this is going to take. Book him, she said again. I need to know the full picture before we file. Vivian was quiet for a moment. You're not just going after the divorce settlement, are you? Rachel thought about her mother's money. About $160,000 that had been sitting in a company account for 4 years, quietly reclassified, quietly reassigned, quietly removed from the woman it was meant to protect. I'm going after what's mine, she said, all of it. 12 minutes major twist building. Daniel came home early that Friday afternoon. Rachel was still at work when he texted just a casual heading home early. Want to grab dinner out tonight? And she had texted back, sounds good. What time? Because she had learned, in the past week, that the most powerful thing she could do was continue to seem entirely, completely normal. They went to dinner at a restaurant they'd been going to for years, the kind of place where the host knew their name and their usual table. Daniel was in a good mood, an exceptionally good mood, the kind that had a specific quality, a lightness in his voice that she had seen before, and had previously attributed to a good day at work or a deal coming together. She looked at it differently now. She listened to everything he said. She asked easy questions and let him talk, because Daniel loved to talk when things were going well, and she needed to understand what he considered going well at this exact moment in time. He talked about a new development project, a commercial complex on the east side of Austin that would be, he said, the largest project Whitmore Development had ever undertaken. He talked about the financing structure. He mentioned that a major private investor had come on board, someone with significant capital, someone who would make the deal viable in a way it hadn't been 6 months ago. Rachel kept her face pleasant. She asked the name. Guy named Victor Hargrove, Daniel said. He runs a private equity group out of Houston. Old money, serious connections. This is the kind of partnership that changes everything, Rachel. I mean it. This time next year we'll be looking at something completely different. Rachel nodded. She said it sounded exciting. She asked the right questions in the right tone. And the whole time she was doing it, she was thinking about what $160,000 of her mother's money looked like inside a deal structure designed to make a man look wealthier than he was. She was thinking about what happens to an investor like Victor Hargrove when he discovers the company he's partnered with has undisclosed liabilities. She was thinking about timing. After dinner, Daniel held her hand on the walk to the car. She let him. He told her he was glad they were okay. She told him she was glad too. He believed her. That was the part that should have felt like a victory and didn't. The following Monday, Rachel met Paul Mara for the first time. He was slight, quiet man in his mid-50s, the kind of person who looked like he belonged in a library rather than a courtroom, but whose reputation for financial forensics was, according to Vivian, unparalleled in the state of Texas. He asked Rachel very few personal questions. He asked her a great many specific technical questions about the documents she had assembled. He took notes in a careful, cramped handwriting that looked like it had been optimized for efficiency rather than legibility. When she finished laying out what she had, Paul looked at his notes for a long moment. You said the reclassification happened approximately 18 months after the original investment was he said. That's what the records show. And in the 18 months between the deposit and the reclassification, were there any amendments to the original partnership agreement? Rachel frowned. Not that I signed. Paul looked up at her. His expression was careful. I'd like to check that. What do you mean? I mean, he said, in the patient tone of a man choosing his words with great precision, that if a reclassification of this magnitude was made to a company's capital structure without a co-invest knowledge, the question becomes how it was documented. Something like this doesn't happen without paperwork. Which means either the paperwork doesn't exist, which is its own kind of problem, or the paperwork exists but was generated without your participation. Rachel was quiet for a moment. Are you saying someone might have signed my name? I'm saying I'd like to look at the documentation carefully, Paul said. And I'm saying that if I find what I think I might find, then what we're looking at is considerably more serious than improper reclassification. Audience retention hook, 18 minutes. Rachel drove home that evening, with the windows down even though it was cool, because she needed the air moving around her. She needed the physical sensation of something to hold on to, while the implications of what Paul had just said arranged themselves inside her. If someone had signed her name, if the amendment that allowed the reclassification of her mother's investment had been without, but if there was a document somewhere with a signature that was not hers, then what she was dealing with was not a divorce dispute. It was a crime. She had been prepared for betrayal. She had been preparing for it carefully and methodically for 2 weeks. But there is something about naming a thing with full legal precision that changes the weight of it. Fraud was a different weight than an affair. Forgery was a different weight than fraud. She sat with it. She thought about Daniel at dinner 4 nights ago, relaxed and happy, holding her hand, talking about Victor Hargrove and the Eastside development deal. Unaware that she had spent the past 2 weeks building a structure around him that he could not see. She thought about the smile, the specific, certain smile. And she felt, for the first time, not just the cold, analytical clarity that had been carrying her, but something underneath it, something that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but was made of both of them. A kind of resolve that had a temperature to it, that felt almost physical. She was going to find everything, every dollar, every document, every thread, and when she was done, there would not be a single thing Daniel Whitmore could point to and claim as his that was not entirely, unambiguously his. Paul Mara called her 3 days later. "I found the amendment," he said. Rachel's hand tightened on the phone. "And the signature on the amendment doesn't match your signature on the original partnership agreement," Paul said. "I've run a basic comparison against 3 other documents you signed during the same period. The inconsistencies are significant." Rachel closed her office door. She sat down. She made herself breathe. "How significant?" "Significant enough that I'd recommend having a handwriting expert look at it," Paul said. "But Rachel, I want to be direct with you. What I'm looking at looks deliberate. This wasn't sloppiness. Someone thought about this." "I know," Rachel said. "Do you want me to continue?" "Yes," she said. "I want you to go back as far as you can. Every entity, every account, every transaction. I want the complete picture. It's going to take another week, maybe 2, then take 2 weeks," she said. "Do it right." She hung up and sat in her office with the door closed for a long time. She thought about the conversation she'd had with Vivian. The one where Vivian had said, "The moment he knows you're looking, things will start to move." Things were going to start moving very soon. She could feel it, not because Daniel had given any indication that he suspected anything, but because evidence of this scale doesn't stay still forever. People talk, records get accessed, patterns become visible from unexpected angles. She needed to be ready before he was. That evening, Rachel did something she had been putting off for personal reasons. She called her sister, Caroline Whitmore. She had kept Daniel's name after her own divorce 5 years ago. A decision she described as too exhausted to deal with the paperwork, was 3 years younger than Rachel, louder and less contained, and the only person in Rachel's life who had ever openly disliked Daniel without bothering to hide it. "He's too comfortable," Caroline had said once, years ago, when Rachel had tried to explain why she loved him. Men who are too comfortable at 34 become men who stop looking at you by 44. Rachel had defended Daniel then. She thought about that now as she listened to the phone ring. Caroline picked up on the 3rd ring. Hey, Rachel said. There must have been something in her voice, because Caroline was quiet for exactly 1 second, and Caroline was never quiet before she said, "What happened?" Rachel told her not everything, not the legal details, not the forensic accountant, not the potential forgery. But the hotel receipt, the HW Consulting Group, the Lauren Hayes thread, the jewelry store charge under client entertainment. She told her enough. Caroline was silent for so long at the end that Rachel thought the call had dropped. Caroline, I'm here. Her voice was different, quieter. How long have you known? 3 weeks. And you're just telling me now. I needed to be sure of what I was looking at before I talked to anyone, Rachel said. You know how I work. I know how you work, Caroline said. Rachel, what do you need? And that question so simple, so direct, so entirely unconcerned with, except what Rachel needed was the thing that almost broke her composure. She felt the edge of it, the sharp corner of a grief she hadn't given herself time to sit with properly, and she breathed through it carefully. I need a place to stay when I'm ready to leave, she said. I'm not ready yet, but when I am, it's going to happen quickly. You have a room here, Caroline said immediately. It's yours whenever you need it, for as long as you need it. Thank you, Rachel. Caroline's voice softened. He doesn't deserve you. He never did, but you are going to be so much better on the other side of this. I know, Rachel said. She did know. That was the strange part. The part she had not fully expected when this began. She had thought the discovery of the full extent of Daniel's betrayal would devastate her. She had braced for devastation. What she found instead was clarity. The kind of clarity that comes when you have been slightly wrong about the shape of your own life for a very long time, and then one day the true shape becomes visible, and even though it is harder than you expected, it is somehow less frightening than the uncertainty was. Major twist 22 minutes. The twist came on a Tuesday from a direction she hadn't anticipated. Rachel had spent the morning at work and the afternoon on a call with Paul, who was methodically working through the second entity, Apex Strategic Partners, and the picture he was building was significant and damning, and growing in ways that made Rachel's chest tighten every time she thought about the scope of it. But the twist didn't come from Paul, it came from Marcus. Marcus was Daniel's oldest business partner, the man Rachel had met 15 years ago when Daniel was first building the company, a straightforward, unpretentious man who had invested early and held a minority stake in Whitmore Development. She had always liked Marcus. He had always seemed, to her professional eye, like a genuinely honest person in an industry that attracted many who were not. He called her cell phone at 4:30 on a Tuesday. Rachel, he said, I hope I'm not overstepping. She noticed the care in his phrasing. You're not. What's going on? A pause. I've been wanting to call you for about a month. I need to talk to someone I trust, and I think you need to know something. Rachel's pulse did not change. She had learned over the past 3 weeks to hold still in moments that wanted her to react. I'm listening. There's a deal moving, Marcus said. The East Side development. Daniel has been presenting it to Victor Hargrove as a clean acquisition, sound financials, strong equity base, no material liabilities. I know about the Hargrove deal, Rachel said carefully. What you might not know, Marcus said slowly, is that 6 weeks ago, Daniel had me sign off on a summary of the company's capital structure. For Hargrove's due diligence, I reviewed what he gave me. It showed a different ownership structure than what I understood to be accurate. He paused. Rachel, it didn't include you. Rachel closed her office door with one hand while she held the phone with the other. Say that again. The capital summary that Daniel presented for the Hargrove deal, Marcus said. Your name isn't on it. Your investment history isn't referenced. The ownership structure shows Daniel as the primary stakeholder and HW Consulting as a minority debt holder. Another pause. I didn't sign off on that version. I told Daniel I wouldn't. But I don't know which version Hargrove's team actually received. Rachel sat down. She thought about Victor Hargrove somewhere in Houston reviewing documents that described a company in which Rachel Whitmore had no recorded ownership. Documents that had been curated, specifically and deliberately, to present a capital structure that served Daniel's purposes and erased her completely. Marcus, she said, would you be willing to put that in writing? A long beat. Yes, he said. Thank you, Rachel said. I'm going to need you to speak with my attorney. After she hung up, Rachel sat in her office and let the full weight of what she had just learned settle around her. Daniel was not just hiding an affair. He was not just hiding the reclassification of her inheritance. He was actively constructing a false picture of the company's ownership structure to secure a major investment deal. A deal that, if it closed with fabricated documentation, would create a legal situation of extraordinary complexity. A deal that had the potential, depending on how it was structured, to remove Rachel from any legitimate claim to the company's assets. The timeline was what mattered now. She didn't know when the Hargrove deal was scheduled to close. She needed to know before it did. She called Vivian. "We need to accelerate," Rachel said without preamble. "What happened?" she told her. Vivian was quiet for a moment. "Marcus Webb is willing to testify. He said he'd speak with you." "Rachel." Vivian's voice shifted into something recognized as controlled urgency. "If this deal closes before we file, it creates a significantly more complicated legal landscape. We need to move. How quickly can you file?" "Give me 48 hours, Vivian said. "I'll have the petition ready, and I'm going to contact Hargrove's legal team directly." "What?" "If they're reviewing a capital sum recently that materially misrepresents the company's ownership structure, they have a right to know that before they complete due diligence." "That's not interference, that's disclosure of a material fact." Vivian's voice was precise and absolutely steady. "It also," she added, "stops the deal." Rachel thought about Daniel at dinner, holding her hand, talking about how this time next year everything would be different. "Do it," Rachel said. She drove home that evening for what she was beginning to understand might be one of the last times she would pursue, as a woman who was only pretending that everything was fine. Daniel was already home. He was on the phone in his office, and she could hear fragments of the conversation. As she set her bag down, in the entryway words like timeline and Hargrove and ready by Friday, and she listened for a moment, and then she walked past the door and up the stairs and into the bedroom and stood there in the silence. Friday, the deal was moving. By Friday, Vivian had 48 hours. Rachel looked at the closet. She looked at the suitcase on the shelf above the hanging clothes, the good one, the one she used for travel, dark egg blue with a silver latch. She didn't touch it yet, but she looked at it. She thought about Caroline's voice on the phone. "You have a room here. It's yours whenever you need it." She thought about her mother's money, reclassified and redirected, and turned into a tool for a man to build something new while his wife's wife stood in a house that was slowly becoming a fiction. She thought about the smile, and she made a decision. Not the decision to leave that had already been made. 3 weeks ago, in the 11 minutes she sat in the dark on the edge of the bed. But a different decision, a decision about when, not yet. But soon enough that Daniel would not see it coming. Soon enough that when she walked out, there would be nothing left for him to take back. That night, Daniel knocked on the bedroom door. While she was reading, he had learned to knock, a habit acquired over years of Rachel's clearly communicated need for quiet space, and he came in and sat on the edge of the bed and said, "Victor Hargrove is coming to Austin on Friday. I'd like you to come to dinner." Rachel looked at him over the top of her book. "He's bringing his wife," Daniel said. "It would mean a lot to me." "You know how to talk to people, Rachel. You always make these dinners easier." She looked at her husband. She looked at the face she had known for 15 years, the particular way he held his jaw when he was managing something. The ease he projected that she now understood was not ease as at all, but the practiced confidence of a man in the middle of a plan he believed was foolproof. "Of course," she said. "What time?" Daniel smiled. "Relieved 7, that Italian place on Congress." "I'll be there," she said. He kissed her forehead. He said good night. He closed the door. Rachel set her book down. She picked up her phone and texted Vivian 3 words. "Deal closes Friday." Vivian's reply came 40 seconds later. "Filing tomorrow morning." Rachel set the phone face down on the nightstand. She picked her book back up, found her place, and read 4 more pages with perfect concentration. Then she turned off the light, and in the dark for the first time in 3 weeks, she slept. Vivian filed at 9:14 on Thursday morning. Rachel was at her desk at Meridian when her phone buzzed with the confirmation text, and she read it twice, then set the phone face down and went back to the client report she was reviewing, because there was nothing to do now but wait. And Rachel Whitmore had learned a long time ago that waiting is not the same as stillness. You can be moving in 6 directions at once while your face shows nothing at all. The petition cited improper reclassification of marital assets, undisclosed financial entities with direct connection to a third party in an extramarital relationship, potential forgery of partnership amendment documentation, and material misrepresentation of the company's capital structure in connection with an active investment solicitation. Vivian had been precise and thorough, and she had not softened a single word of it because Vivian Cole did not believe in softening things that needed to land hard. Alongside the filing, she had sent a formal notice to Victor Hargrove's legal team in Houston. The notice did not accuse anyone of anything. It simply informed Hargrove's counsel that the capital structure of Whitmore Development LLC was currently the subject of legal proceedings, and that any investment decision made prior to the resemblance Ausmusrusings would be made with incomplete information about the company's true owner composition. That was all it said. It was enough. Rachel knew it was enough because she had spent 15 years watching what happened to deals when a single piece of inconvenient information arrived at the right moment. Investors did not take risks they could have avoided. That was the first rule of money. The second rule was that the moment a deal touched anything resembling active litigation, it stopped moving. The Hargrove deal stopped moving at approximately 11:30 Thursday morning. Rachel knew this because Daniel called her at 11:34. She let it ring twice before she answered. "Hey," she said. "Calm, easy, where are you?" His voice was different. Not angry, yet something tighter than angry. See, something with more compressed force behind it, like pressure building against a sealed valve. "At work. What's going on? I need you to come home." "Daniel, I'm in the middle of Rachel." The word came out flat and hard. "Come home." She paused exactly long enough to seem like she was making a decision. "I'll be there by 1. She called Vivian from the parking garage. "He knows," she said. "The filing is public record as of this morning." His attorney would have notified him within the hour. Vivian's voice was measured. "Are you safe?" "Yes." Rachel didn't hesitate. Daniel's not that kind of angry. "What kind is he?" "The kind that needs to win," Rachel said. "He's going to try to talk his way out of this. He's going to try to make me feel like I've made a terrible mistake." "Can he?" "No," Rachel said simply. "Good, don't sign anything. Don't agree to anything. If he becomes aggressive, leave." "Call me from the car." "I know," Rachel said. "I've got it." She drove home. Daniel was standing in the living room when she walked in, and she could read the state of him the way she read financial documents quickly, completely, noting everything. His jacket was still on, which meant he'd come straight home without stopping. His phone was in his hand. His jaw was set in the particular way it set when he was managing something he hadn't anticipated. He waited until she had set her bag down. "You filed for divorce," he said. "Yes," without saying a word to me. "Yes." He stared at her. She watched him process that, the simple, direct acknowledgement with no apology attached to it, no softening, no attempt to contextualize or justify. She could see it did not compute. In 12 years of marriage, Rachel had always, eventually, explained herself. Always found a way to frame difficult truths as collaborative problems, rather than unilateral decisions. "Why?" he said, and under the controlled surface of the word, there was something that surprised her, not quite hurt, but adjacent to it. The shock of a man confronting a version of his wife he had genuinely not believed existed. "I think you know why," she said. "The hotel," he said. "Rachel, if this is about, it's not about the hotel." He stopped. She watched him recalibrate. "Then what is it about?" Rachel looked at her husband. She had thought about this moment. She had run it through her mind in various versions over the past 3 weeks, had considered different approaches, measured and precise, or emotional and direct, or cold and legal. She had considered saying everything. She had considered saying almost nothing. She had decided on the truth, simply without theater. "It's about my mother's money," she said. "It's about HW Consulting Group. It's about Lauren Hayes. And it's about an amendment to our partnership agreement that I did not sign." The silence that followed was the longest one they had ever shared. Daniel's expression moved through several things in quick succession. She watched it happen and cataloged it the way she cataloged everything. First, a flash of something raw and genuine, something that might have been real fear. Then the rapid, almost visible process of containment. And then, sliding into place over the top of all of it, the smooth composure she had seen him deploy 1,000 times in business contexts when something had gone wrong and he needed to project control. "You don't understand how any of that worked," he said. His voice had dropped to something lower, more careful. The voice of a man who has decided to be patient with someone who has made an error. The reclassification was a standard accounting adjustment. "Paul," he stopped. "Paul?" Rachel said. He had said a name he intended to. She saw it register on his face, the small stumble, the quick recovery. "My accountant," he said. It was his recommendation. There's documentation of a signature that isn't mine," Rachel said. "Paul Mara has reviewed it." This time the silence was different. Shorter, harder. "Who is Paul Mara?" "He's a forensic accountant," Rachel said. "He's been reviewing the company's financial records for the past 2 weeks." Daniel looked at her, and for a moment, just a moment, the composure dropped completely, and she saw what was underneath it. Not the husband she had known, not the businessman, not the confident man with the certain smile. Just a person who had underestimated someone and was only now understanding the full cost of that mistake. "Rachel," he said, "whatever you think you've found." "I've contacted Victor Hargrove's legal team," she said. "His due diligence team has been informed that the capital structure you presented is currently under legal review." Daniel went very still. "The Hargrove deal," she said, "is on hold." He didn't move for a long moment. He stood there with his phones in his hand and his jacket on, and the expression of who has just watched something he spent years building begin to come apart in a way he cannot immediately stop. "You did that," he said, very quietly. "Yes, you could destroy everything I've built." Rachel looked at him steadily. "What you've built," she said, "was partly built with money that belonged to my mother. And then to me." He took a step toward her. Not threatening, she had been honest with Vivian about that. Daniel was not a man who expressed his anger physically. But forceful, present. The step of a man I teach you to understand that he is still in the room. "I made that money worth 10 times what it was," he said. "That company exists because of what I did, not because of a check." "That check," Rachel said, "was my mother's life savings. And you used it to build something and then removed my name from it." "That is not what happened. I have documentation that says otherwise." His voice rose then, the first time it had risen since she'd walked in. "You have a misunderstanding. You have someone who doesn't understand how construction financing works telling you a story that fits what you wanted to find." "I found it before I wanted to find it," Rachel said. "I wasn't looking for this, Daniel. I was looking for an explanation for a hotel receipt. You could have given me that, and it would have been the end of it. You chose to tell me I was paranoid. You chose to tell me to leave." He said nothing. "So I'm leaving," she said, "and I'm taking what's mine." 10 minutes, major twist, audience hook. The thing about Daniel Whitmore was that he did not give up easily. That was the quality Rachel had admired most in him when they were young, the relentless, driving refusal to accept an outcome he didn't want. She had watched him rebuild a failed contract from nothing, talk a bank into a loan. 3 people had already declined, hold a business together through a market downturn that broke other companies twice his size. That quality had made him exceptional. It also made him dangerous in the particular way that people who do not accept unwanted outcomes can be dangerous. He called her 3 times before dinner. She didn't answer. He texted twice, calm, measured texts that were clearly composed rather than impulsive, the kind of texts a man writes when he is controlling his communication carefully. She read them both and did not reply. She was packing. Not everything. She was deliberate about it. The things that were hers beyond any argument, her personal documents, her professional files, 2 boxes of her mother's things that she had kept in the back of the closet for 4 years. Her clothes, her grandmother's jewelry, the photographs she cared about. She was not taking the furniture, she was not taking the art. She was not taking anything that would require a negotiation she wasn't ready to have today, because today was not the day for every battle. Today was the day for the one that mattered. Caroline arrived at 4 o'clock. She knocked on the door and Rachel let her in, and Caroline looked at her sister, really looked at her, the way you look at someone you're afraid might be falling apart, and Rachel looked back at her steadily, and Caroline's face did something complicated, and then settled. "You're okay," Caroline said. "Not a question, I'm okay," Rachel said. "You don't look like someone whose life is falling apart." "My life isn't falling apart," Rachel said. "My marriage is." "Those aren't the same thing." Caroline looked around at the careful, organized staging of departure, the boxes, the suitcase open on the bed, the systematic precision of it all. "Did he know you were going to do this today?" "He knows I filed." "He doesn't know I'm leaving today. What time is he usually home?" 6, sometimes 6:30. Caroline looked at the clock. "Then let's be done by 5:30. They moved through the house together, quiet and efficient, and Rachel was grateful in a way she could not articulate that Caroline did not cry and did not editorialize, and did not say any of that would have cost Rachel the composure she needed to hold. Caroline simply helped. She carried boxes, she wrapped things carefully. She asked this one, or leave it, with minimal fuss. At one point, standing in the bedroom with a box half filled, Caroline said quietly, "Mom would be proud of you." Rachel stopped for a moment, just a moment, then she kept packing. Daniel's car pulled into the driveway at 5:48. Rachel was in the kitchen. She had stayed deliberately. She had asked Caroline to wait in the car with the last of the boxes because she needed to do this part alone, and because she understood, on some level she hadn't fully articulated even to herself, that she owed him this. Not an explanation she had given him that, but her presence. The confirmation that she was doing this herself, knowingly, with complete intention. He came in through the garage door and stopped when he saw her. He looked at her face, then at the kitchen, the things missing from it, the small absences that tell you something has been removed. "Rachel," his voice was very quiet, "what did you do?" "I packed what I needed," she said. "I'm leaving tonight." He crossed the kitchen in 3 steps and stood in front of her. Close, not touching her. "You can't do this, I'm doing it. The kids at the office are going to see the filing. My partners are going to see the filing. Marcus is going to—" He stopped. A thought crossed his face. "Did you talk to Marcus?" She said nothing, which was its own answer. His face changed. "Marcus talked to you. He called me," Rachel said. "He was worried about what he'd been asked to sign off on." "Marcus doesn't understand the deal structure. He understood it well enough not to sign the version you showed Hargrove," Rachel said. Daniel turned away from her. He put both hands on the kitchen counter and stood there with his back to her, and she could see, in the set of his shoulders, in the rigidity of his posture, the enormous effort of a man trying to keep himself together. "What do you want?" he said finally, to the counter. "To the wall, not to her. I want what's mine," Rachel said. "My mother's investment properly accounted for, my share of the marital assets." A dissolution of this marriage. He turned around. His eyes were red at the edges, not from crying, she didn't think, but from the pressure of whatever he was holding back. "And Lauren?" It was the first time he had said the name. Rachel looked at him. "What about her?" "I'll end it," he said. "If that's what this is about, I'll end it. Rachel, we can work through this. Whatever you found, whatever Paul, whatever his name is, told you, we can sit down with actual lawyers and actual accountants and straighten it out. It doesn't have to be this. It was this before I found the receipt," Rachel said. "I just didn't know it yet." He flinched. She hadn't expected that. The small, involuntary physical response to a truth delivered at close range. "You mean that?" he said. "Yes. You've been done for longer than you're telling me." "No," she said. "I've been invisible for longer than either of us wanted to admit." "That's different." He stared at her, and in his eyes, underneath the desperation and the calculation and the particular pride of a man who cannot stand losing, she saw something else. Something she hadn't expected. Recognition. As if the version of her he was looking at right now was one he had always known was there and had, for his own reasons, chosen not to acknowledge. "I made mistakes," he said. The words came out like something dragged up from a depth, heavy with the effort of the retrieval. Yes, Rachel said. I can fix them, some of them, she said. In court with attorneys, that process has already started. Rachel, I'm leaving, Daniel. And she picked up her bag. She walked to the door. She put her hand on the frame. Behind her, she heard him make a sound low and brief and not quite formed, the sound of a word that didn't make it all the way out. She walked through the door, 18 minutes audience retention hook. Caroline was parked at the end of the driveway with the engine running, and Rachel got into the passenger seat and closed the door. And Caroline looked at her, and Rachel looked straight ahead and said, "Drive." Caroline drove. They were 3 blocks away before either of them spoke. "Are you okay?" Caroline said. Rachel thought about that seriously. The way she thought about everything, not the reflexive "I'm fine" that had been her default for years, but the actual question. Was she okay? What did okay mean tonight, with her boxes in the back of her sister's car, and 12 years of her life in a house that was already behind her? "Yes," she said finally. "I think I actually am." She called Vivian from the car. "I'm out," she said. "Good," Vivian said. "His attorney called me this afternoon. They want to negotiate, of course they do. The Hargrove situation is causing pressure. They know we have the capital structure documentation and the Marcus Webb statement. They're going to want to settle. On what terms?" "That's what we need to decide," Vivian said. "Can you come in tomorrow morning?" 8 o'clock, Rachel said. She slept that night in Caroline's guest room on a mattress that was slightly too soft and in a room that smelled faintly of the lavender candles Caroline burned compulsively, and she lay in the dark and thought about nothing in particular. That was the surprise of the first night, not the grief, not the racing thoughts, not the weight of everything she had set in motion. The quiet, the particular quality of a silence that doesn't have anyone else in it. It was the first night in 12 years she had fallen asleep without waiting for a sound from the other side of the bed. She slept for 7 hours without interruption. In the morning, she went to Vivian's office. Paul Mara was already there, which told Rachel that Vivian had expected this meeting to be significant. Paul had a bound report in front of him, 32 pages, and Rachel noted that the tab on the cover read Whitmore Development LLC Financial Structure Analysis in the impersonal font of a document built for courtroom presentation. She sat down. She put her hands flat on the table. "Tell me everything," she said. Paul opened the report. What he laid out over the next 45 minutes was a financial structure that Rachel had suspected in its broad outlines, but had not fully understood in its specifics. Whitmore Development had, over the course of 7 years, channeled capital through 2 separate entities, HW Consulting Group and Apex Strategic Partners. The money moved in patterns consistent with what Paul described as circular enrichment, a structure in which funds leave a primary entity, pass through secondary vehicles to create the appearance of third-party revenue, and then re-enter the primary entity as legitimate income or debt. The effect of this structure was threefold. It made the company's revenue appear stronger than it was. It created the appearance of multiple independent investors validating the company's value. And it dramatically reduced on paper Rachel's ownership stake in a company that her mother's money had helped capitalize as. The company currently shows Rachel as holding an 11% minority interest, Paul said. Based on the original capital investment, properly accounted for, that figure should be between 38 and 42%. Rachel looked at the number, 38 to 42%. "What does that mean for the Hargrove deal?" Vivian asked. "It means that if the deal had closed with the structure Daniel presented, Victor Hargrove would have invested $30 million into a company with a materially misrepresented ownership structure and 2 undisclosed related party debt instruments," Paul said. "The exposure there is significant, for Hargrove and for Daniel." "Securities fraud," Vivian said. "At minimum," Paul said carefully. "I'm not going to use that term in my report. That's a determination for the attorneys and ultimately the courts. But the pattern is consistent with what that term describes." Rachel was quiet for a long moment. She was thinking about Daniel in the kitchen the night before, his hands on the counter, his back to her, saying, "What do you want?" She had told him what was hers, the investment, the assets. The dissolution. She had not said everything else this is going to cost you. Because that hadn't been her goal. That had never been her goal. She had not started this process wanting to destroy Daniel Whitmore. She had started it wanting to understand what had been done to her and to protect what was hers and to leave with her dignity and her mother's legacy intact. But the picture Paul was describing now was larger than a marital dispute. Does this have to go beyond the divorce proceedings? She asked. Both of them, Vivian and Paul, they exchanged a look. That depends, Vivian said carefully, on whether Hargrove's attorneys decide to take it further independently. We can't control that. What we can control is our proceeding. And Marcus, Rachel said, he was given false documentation. Marcus is a material witness to the misrepresentation, Vivian confirmed. His statement is part of our record. What he chooses to do beyond cooperating with our proceedings is his decision. Rachel nodded. She sat with the weight of that for a moment. This was what it looked like when the full picture emerged. Not clean, not simple. Not the satisfying legal correction she had imagined in the early days of her investigation when she had believed the scope of it was manageable. This was larger and messier and touched more people than just the two of them. What is Daniel's attorney offering? She asked. Vivian turned to a different section of her notes. A settlement acknowledging a 30% ownership stake in Whitmore Development, a cash payment of $200,000, described as resolution of the investment reclassification, and a standard division of marital assets. Rachel looked at her. 30%, she said. That's their opening position. Paul says 38 to 42. I know what Paul says. Then they know they're low. They're testing, Vivian said. They want to know how much you know and how far you're willing to go. Rachel thought about her mother, about the meticulous records Eleanor Whitmore had kept, about the decades of careful saving that had become, in the end, a sum of money entrusted to a man who had treated it as a tool. Tell them 41, Rachel said, and I want the full accounting of both entities, AW Consulting and Apex Strategic. Every transaction, every date, every amount. I want it disclosed, documented, and attached to the settlement agreement. Vivian raised an eyebrow. They won't want the disclosure. I know, Rachel said. That's why I want it. 22 minutes, major twist. The twist came 3 days later, and it came from Lauren Hayes. Rachel had not thought about Lauren Hayes as a person very much. She had thought about her as a corporate entity, as a thread in a financial structure, as a nib on documents and a connection on organizational charts. She had deliberately not allowed herself to think about Lauren Hayes as a woman because that version of the story, the other woman, the betrayal, the personal humiliation of it was not the version Rachel needed to inhabit right now. She needed to inhabit the version where Lauren Hayes was a financial problem to be solved. But Lauren Hayes turned out to have her own ideas. She called Rachel's cell phone on a Wednesday morning. Rachel almost didn't answer. She didn't recognize the number, and she had been receiving calls she didn't recognize with increasing frequency since the filing became public record. She answered because some instinct she couldn't name told her to. This is Rachel Whitmore, she said, a pause, then quietly, I know who you are. This is Lauren Hayes. Rachel said nothing. She was in the parking garage again, in her car, the engine not yet started. She sat very still and she waited. I need to talk to you, Lauren said. Not through lawyers. Why would I do that? Because I can tell you things your forensic accountant can't, Lauren said. Her voice was careful, controlled. But underneath the control, there was something that sounded almost like relief. And because I think you deserve to know who actually made those decisions. Rachel looked at the concrete wall in front of her car. Are you telling me something you should be saying to an attorney? She asked. I've already talked to an attorney, Lauren said. My own. She told me to be very careful about making this call. I'm making it anyway. Why? A pause that lasted long enough to tell Rachel something real was being weighed. Because when I started with his company, I was 25 years old, Lauren said. And he was very convincing, and by the time I understood what I was involved in, I was too far in a clean way out. Her voice didn't crack, but it thinned slightly, the sound of someone holding a emotion flat through deliberate effort. I'm not asking for your sympathy. I know I'm not entitled to that. No, Rachel said, you're not, but I'm asking you to listen. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. You have 10 minutes, she said. Lauren talked for 14. She talked about HW Consulting Group, how Daniel had approached her in the second month of her employment, the suggestion of incorporating an entity through which he could channel certain actions more efficiently. She had been young. She had trusted him. She had not understood at the time exactly what efficiently meant. She talked about the moment she had understood. She talked about the amendment to the partnership agreement, the document with Rachel's name on it. She did not say she had witnessed it being signed. She said she had seen it before and after, and that the before and after were different in ways she had not questioned loudly enough. She talked about Apex Strategic Partners, which was not connected to her. Which was connected, she believed, to someone else entirely. Who, Rachel said. Lauren said a name Rachel had not heard before. A man named Gerald Crane, who was not a business associate of Daniel's in any public capacity, but who had, according to Lauren, been involved in the financial structure of Whitmore Development from its earliest days. A silent partner whose role had never been documented and whose connection to the company existed only in the cash flows that Palmara had been following. Rachel wrote the name on the back of a receipt she found in her bag. Gerald Crane, why are you telling me this? Rachel said. Because Daniel told me the Hargrove deal would change everything, Lauren said. And when I found out what that meant, what it meant for his wife, for the money she'd inherited from her mother, I told him I wanted out. That was 2 months ago. Her voice was very quiet now. He told me I was already in, that there was no out. Rachel sat with that. She thought about a 25-year-old who had been convinced by a confident man that efficiency was a reasonable thing to help create. She was not ready to feel sympathy for Lauren Hayes. She might never be ready for that, but she was able to recognize with the professional clarity that had been carrying her through all of this, that Lauren Hayes was not the architect of what had happened to Rachel's mother's money. She was a participant, but she was not the architect. Would you be willing to give a formal statement? Rachel said. My attorney is drafting one, Lauren said. I wanted you to hear it from me first. Rachel said nothing for a moment. Thank you for calling, she said finally. It was not forgiveness, it was not absolution, but it was the truth. She was, in a specific and limited way, grateful for the call. She hung up. She called Vivian immediately. Lauren Hayes just called me, she said. She heard Vivian stop moving on the other end. Directly? Directly, she's giving a formal statement, and she gave me a name. Rachel looked at the receipt. Gerald Crane, she says he's a silent partner in Apex Strategic Partners. He's been involved since the company's beginning, and he's never been documented. The pause that followed was Vivian doing what Vivian did, processing, calculating, understanding the implications before she spoke. If there's an undisclosed, silent partner with equity in the company, Vivian said slowly, and that partner's involvement has been concealed from co-investors, from the court, and potentially from the IRS, then the scope of what we're looking at has just changed significantly. I know, Rachel said. Rachel, this is Vivian. Stopped. Started again. This goes beyond the divorce settlement. I know, we may need to bring in. I know, Rachel said again. Let's meet this afternoon. She drove out of the parking garage. She drove to work. She sat at her desk. She reviewed a client file she barely saw. And she thought about Daniel in the kitchen, asking, what do you want? As if what she wanted was the thing that would determine what happened next. What she wanted was simple. What she wanted had always been simple. The truth accounted for completely. She had simply not known when she started how much truth there was. That afternoon, the three of them, Rachel, Vivian, and Paul, sat in Vivian's conference room with the full picture spread across the table for the first time. The entities, the transactions, the timeline, the names. Lauren's account of the partnership amendment, the Gerald Crane thread that needed to be followed before it could be fully evaluated. Paul looked at it the way he looked at everything, with the calm of a man who has seen large financial disaster before and knows that the first thing you do is not panic, but map. "This is bigger than a divorce case," he said. "Yes," Vivian said. "You're going to make a decision about how far this goes," Paul said to Rachel. "Because the forensic trail doesn't stop at the edge of the marriage. If we follow it to its natural conclusion, we're talking about a pattern of undisclosed financial activities spanning 7 years and involving at least 3 people." Rachel looked at the table. She thought about her mother's hands. Eleanor Whitmore's hands, which had been the careful, deliberate hands of a woman who had held every dollar she earned as if it were a small, living thing that required protection. Her mother had not been a wealthy woman. She had been a patient one. And patience over a lifetime had built something worth protecting. Rachel had not protected it the way her mother would have wanted. She was going to correct that, follow it, she said. All the way Paul nodded. Vivian made a note. And Rachel looked at the documents spread across the table, every thread she had pulled, every name she had found, every number that had led to the next number, and she felt something she hadn't allowed herself to feel yet. Not triumph, too early for that and too much still ahead. But something underneath triumph, something that lives at the base of it. She felt right. She felt, for the first time in a very long time, completely, entirely, undeniably right. The name Gerald Crane took Paul Mara 4 days to fully trace. Rachel knew it was going to be significant the moment Paul called her. On a Sunday morning, Paul did not work Sundays. He had told her that explicitly in their first meeting. He kept Sundays for his family and his garden, and the particular kind of silence that sustained him through the rest of the week. When his number appeared on her phone at 9:40 on a Sunday, she answered before the second ring. "I found him," Paul said, no preamble, no good morning. "Tell me." Gerald Crane is 61 years old. He ran a private lending operation out of San Antonio for about 15 years, not illegal, but the kind of operation that exists in the space between legitimate banking and something less regulated. He provided short-term capital to small developers who couldn't qualify for conventional financing. High interest, fast terms, quiet arrangements. Rachel was already sitting up. And Daniel? Daniel Whitmore was one of his clients in the early years of the company, before the business had the track record to access conventional credit. Crane provided the seed capital that got Whitmore Development through its first 18 months. "How much?" $240,000, Paul said. "Never documented as equity, always structured as a personal loan." "But the repayment terms, Rachel, the repayment terms are what matters." Crane wasn't collecting interest in cash. She waited. "He was collecting it in ownership," Paul said. "Every quarter, instead of an interest payment, Daniel transferred a fractional ownership stake. Not in Whitmore Development directly, in Apex Strategic Partners, which Crane controlled, which in turn held a debt position against Whitmore Development." Rachel was quiet for a long moment. "So Crane owns Apex," she said. "Crane controls Apex," Paul corrected carefully. "Whether he legally owns it in a way that triggers disclosure requirements is a question for the attorneys. But the financial relationship is clear. He's been extracting value from Whitmore Development for 7 years through a structure specifically designed to avoid appearing on any document that would require disclosure to co-investors or business partners." "Or wives," Rachel said. "Or wives," Paul confirmed. She thought about the capital summary Daniel had prepared for Victor Hargrove. The one that didn't include her name. She thought about how much work it had taken to construct that summary, the deliberate erasure of her, the erasure of Crane, the clean and reassuring picture of a self-made man with a straightforward company. "Paul," she said, "what is Crane's exposure here?" "Significant," he said. "If the arrangement constitutes undisclosed equity interest, which I believe it does, then the failure to disclose it to co-investors, including you, is a material omission. Combined with the Hargrove solicitation, you're looking at potential securities violations that go well beyond the civil proceedings." "Does Vivian know? I'm calling her next," Paul said. "I wanted you to hear it first," she thanked him. She sat in Caroline's guest room with the phone in her lap and the Sunday morning quiet around her, and thought about Daniel 7 years ago. Young and hungry and not yet successful enough to be conventional. Taking money from a man like Gerald Crane because it was available and he was in a hurry. Making a deal he thought he could manage. She thought about how deals like that have a way of growing around you until you can't remember a version of yourself that existed before them. She almost felt something adjacent to understanding. Not forgiveness, not sympathy, but the recognition that the person who makes the first bad decision and the person who is still making bad decisions 7 years later are connected by a chain of smaller ones. And at some point along that chain, there are moments where everything could have been different. Daniel had not taken those moments, he had taken the other ones. She got up, made coffee, and called Vivian. By Monday morning, the picture that had been assembling itself for 5 weeks was complete enough to be presented. Not complete in the sense of finished, these things were never finished. There would always be another thread, another implication, another discovery at the edge of the one before it. But complete enough that Vivian could walk into a room with the other side's attorneys and make them understand, with total clarity, the position they were actually in. The meeting was scheduled for Wednesday. Daniel's attorney was a man named Robert Calloway, a capable, experienced family law attorney who had been practicing in Austin for 30 years and who had, Rachel gathered, been doing his best to manage a client whose situation kept becoming more complicated. She had seen his name on enough documents by now to have formed a professional impression of him, methodical, not flashy, the kind of attorney who preferred resolution to theater and who was probably, by this point, deeply frustrated with the gap between what his client had told him and what kept emerging from the evidence. Vivian prepared Rachel the afternoon before. "They're going to make a new offer," Vivian said. Calloway called this morning. He knows about the Crane connection. Paul's report went to both sides this morning, and he knows about Lauren's statement. He's not going to try to defend the capital structure anymore. What will they offer? I don't know yet, but I think they're going to come significantly closer to what you want. Vivian paused. "Here's what I need from you tomorrow. You don't have to perform anything. You don't have to be angry or forgiving or emotional in any direction. You just have to be exactly what you are." "What's that?" "The person who found everything," Vivian said simply. "That's the most powerful thing you can be in that room. Not a wronged wife, not someone who wants revenge. Someone who did the work and knows the full picture." Rachel thought about that. "That's not a performance," she said. "No," Vivian agreed. "It's not." 10 minutes major twist audience hook. Wednesday arrived with a quality of weight that Rachel had been expecting. She dressed the way she dressed for major client presentations at Meridian, not formally, but with the particular intentionality of someone who understands that how you appear in a room shapes how you're heard in a room. She arrived at Vivian's office 15 minutes early and sat with a cup of coffee and ran through nothing in her head because there was nothing left to run through. She knew the numbers, she knew the timeline, she knew the names and the entities and the transactions and the implications of each of them. She was ready. Robert Calloway arrived with Daniel. Rachel had known Daniel would be there. Vivian had told her to expect it. But knowing and experiencing were different, and when Daniel walked through the conference room door and their eyes met across the length of the table, she felt the weight of it, not the grief, not anymore. But something heavier and more complex than grief, the weight of 12 years of a shared life sitting in a room with attorneys on either side of it. Daniel looked tired. That was the first thing she noticed. The particular tiredness of someone who has not been sleeping, not the ordinary exhaustion of a busy person, but the specific hollowness of someone whose mind will not let them rest. He had lost weight. His suit, which she remembered him buying, sat slightly wrong on his shoulders. He sat down across from her. He did not look away first. Neither did she. Calloway opened. He was professional and measured, and he did not waste time on preamble, which Rachel respected. "My client acknowledges that the financial structure of Whitmore Development, LLC, as currently documented, presents significant questions regarding the allocation of ownership interests." He is prepared to negotiate a resolution that addresses Mrs. Whitmore's legitimate claims without requiring further escalation of these proceedings. Vivian looked at Rachel. Rachel said, "What is your client offering?" Calloway placed a document on the table. Rachel looked at it without picking it up. She had learned early in her career never to pick up a document before you've had a moment to observe the person who placed it. 40% ownership interest in Whitmore Development, valued at current assessed company value minus outstanding liabilities, Calloway said. Full accounting and disclosure of both HW Consulting Group and Apex Strategic Partners, attached to the settlement agreement as exhibits. A cash payment of $350,000 representing the reclassified investment from the Eleanor Whitmore estate, plus accrued value. Standard division of jointly held marital assets. Rachel picked up the document. She read it. She set it down. The company valuation used here, she said. It's based on the capital structure as currently documented. Before correction, Calloway glanced at his notes. The valuation was conducted by before the Crane connection was established, Rachel said. Before the reclassification was reversed on paper. The true valuation of the company with my ownership interest correctly reflected, and the Apex debt instrument properly categorized is different from this number. Calloway looked at her, then at Vivian. Vivian said nothing. She didn't need to, Rachel continued. I want an independent valuation conducted post-correction. Whatever that number is, 40% of it is what we're discussing. Not 40% of a number that reflects the structure as it was built to disadvantage me. Daniel moved for the first time since he'd sat down. Not much a slight shift in his posture, the smallest forward lean. The company is already under pressure from the Hargrove situation. If we go back and revalue under litigation conditions, Daniel, Calloway said quietly. Daniel stopped. He looked at his attorney. Something passed between them, the particular look of a client being managed, being reminded to let the professionals handle it. He sat back. Rachel watched him do it. We're not negotiating against a pressured company value, she said. We're negotiating against the real one. Calloway was quiet for a moment. He made a note. I'll need to consult with my client. Of course, Vivian said. We'll take a short break. Rachel stood. She walked to the window and stood there while behind her she could hear the low conversation between Daniel and Calloway, not the words, just the cadence of it, the particular rhythm of a client being given news he doesn't want. She thought about Gerald Crane, somewhere in San Antonio, who did not yet know that his name was in a bound forensic report being discussed in an Austin law office. She thought about what his exposure looked like. She thought about Marcus Webb, who had made one phone call out of conscience and had changed the entire trajectory of what came next. She thought briefly and with a clarity that surprised her that she did not want Daniel to go to prison. She examined that thought carefully, the way she examined everything. Turned it over, checked it for sentimentality, for misplaced loyalty, for the particular kind of softness that 12 years of shared life can produce even when the life had been what it had been. It wasn't sentimentality, it was something more precise than that. She didn't want Daniel in prison because what she wanted was not punishment. What she wanted was accounting. The word in its truest financial sense, every dollar traced, every decision documented, every misrepresentation corrected on the record. She wanted the truth to be the permanent, unalterable version of what had happened. Prison or no prison, the truth would be the truth. What happened to Daniel after the truth was established was not, ultimately, her concern. Calloway touched her arm as she turned back from the window. Mrs. Whitmore, my client would like a moment to speak with you directly. Rachel looked at Vivian. Vivian looked at her steadily with the expression that said, this is your call. 2 minutes, Rachel said. Calloway stepped out of the room. Vivian followed, closing the door quietly behind her. Rachel sat back down across the table from Daniel. He looked at her for a long moment. I don't know how to do this, he said finally. Do what? This? He gestured vaguely at the table, the documents, the room, the whole apparatus of what their marriage had become. I don't know how to sit across from you and negotiate like you're someone I need to defeat. I'm not asking you to defeat me, Rachel said. I know. He pressed his hands flat on the table. I know that. That's the part I keep not being able to get around. He looked at her. You're not angry. I've been angry, she said. I'm past it. What are you now? She thought about it. Clear, she said. He was quiet, Daniel. She kept her voice even, not cold. She didn't want cold. Cold was its own kind of performance. I'm not trying to take something from you. I'm trying to get back what was taken from me. Those are different things. If you understand that difference, this goes faster and costs less and ends without anyone going to a place neither of us wants this to go. He looked at her for a long time. Gerald Crane, he said. It was not a question, yes. That was a mistake I made before I fully understood what it was going to cost. His voice was quiet. Not quite defeated, Daniel Whitmore was constitutionally incapable of fully defeated, but something close to honest. Most mistakes are, Rachel said. I should have told you. Yes, I couldn't figure out how to get out from under it and tell you at the same time, and the longer I waited, the more impossible both things became. I understand the logic of that, Rachel said. I don't forgive it. But I understand it. He nodded once, slowly. What do you actually need, he said. Not the legal version, not the numbers, you. Rachel thought about her mother's hands again. She thought about $340,000 of patient, careful accumulation. I need it on the record, she said, all of it, correctly. Permanently, I need my mother's investment accounted for as what it was. I need my ownership interest reflected as what it actually is. And I need to walk away from this with enough to build something of my own without anything attached to you or to this or to any of it. He was quiet for a moment. The independent valuation, he said. Yes, another pause. Okay, he said. It was such a small word for the size of what it meant. Okay, she said. She called Vivian back into the room. 20 minutes audience retention hook, mini climax. The independent valuation took 11 days. Rachel did not find those 11 days easy. The active, purposeful work of the past 5 weeks had given her structure, and without an immediate next task, she felt the edges of things she had been efficiently, not feeling the grief she had rationed in 11-minute increments. The loneliness that was different from solitude, the particular sadness of ending something you had once genuinely loved. She went to work. She talked to Caroline every evening. She had dinner with Vivian once, outside the professional context, and they talked about their mothers and their careers and the specific exhaustion of being the person in the room who always has to be the most prepared. Do you miss him? Caroline asked one evening. Rachel thought about it honestly. I miss who I thought he was, she said. I miss the person I believed I was married to. That person doesn't exist. So what I actually miss is a version of the past 12 years that also doesn't exist. That's a strange thing to grieve. It's still grief, Caroline said. Yes, Rachel agreed. It is. The valuation came back on a Thursday. The corrected ownership structure with Rachel's 40% interest properly reflected, the Apex debt instrument reclassified from third party to related party, and the circular enrichment adjustments made to the revenue figures produced a company value that was, in some ways, lower than Daniel had presented to Hargrove, and in other ways more stable. The inflated revenue picture disappeared. What remained was a real company, a genuinely viable operation worth less on paper than Daniel had claimed, but worth it honestly. 40% of that honest number was $218,000 more than what the original settlement had offered. Rachel sat in Vivian's office and read the number and felt nothing theatrical about it. She felt something simpler, the satisfaction of a correct answer to a problem that had taken a long time to properly formulate. Callaway called this morning, Vivian said. They've accepted the independent valuation. All of it? All of it. The full disclosure exhibits, the corrected ownership interest, the cash payment recalculated to reflect the independent assessment. Vivian looked at her. Rachel, we won. Rachel nodded. She had known they would. Not from arrogance. She had never been arrogant about this. There had been too many moments where the picture could have shifted, too many variables she couldn't control. But she had known from the very early days of her investigation that the truth was on her side in the most literal and verifiable sense. And the truth properly documented and correctly presented wins. Not always, not in every courtroom, not without cost and time and the willingness to hold your position through a great deal of pressure. But it wins. The settlement agreement was signed 9 days later. Rachel sat at Vivian's conference table with a pen in her hand and the final document in front of her, and she read every page. Every single page. She did not rush. She did not sign anything she had not fully read. She had learned expensively and permanently not to do that. When she got to the last page and signed her name, she felt the pen move with the particular weight of something final. She set it down. She looked at her signature, Eleanor Whitmore's daughter. Her name on a document that said clearly and permanently, "This is what belongs to her." Major twist. 28 minutes. The twist she had not anticipated arrived 2 days after the settlement was signed. It did not arrive from Daniel. It did not arrive from Vivian or Paul. It arrived in a form Rachel would not have predicted. A letter, handwritten, to Vivian's office as it's addressed to Rachel personally. The handwriting on the envelope was careful. The return address was a San Antonio law firm. Rachel opened it at Vivian's desk, standing up, because she had learned by now to open unexpected things while in a position to respond quickly. Inside was a single page, handwritten in the same careful script. It was from Gerald Crane. She had not expected Gerald Crane to contact her. She had not expected Gerald Crane to do anything except retain attorneys and go quiet and see situation from a position of carefully maintained distance. That was what people in his position did. That was the rational move. The letter was not the rational move. It was, instead, something she had not encountered in any version of this process. It was an apology, not a legal apology, not the carefully worded expression of regret that attorneys construct to satisfy liability requirements without constituting admission. A real one, 3 paragraphs, handwritten, from a 61-year-old man who had spent his career in the spaces between legitimate business and something less legitimate, and who had, apparently, been sitting with a specific weight since Paul Mara's report had made his name known to the parties in the proceeding. He wrote that he had known, when Daniel brought him into the company's early financing, that the arrangement was structured to avoid disclosure. He wrote that he had known a woman's inheritance had been incorporated into the company's capital base, and that the arrangement he and Daniel had constructed would affect her ownership position. He wrote that he had told himself, in the way people tell themselves things that allow them to continue, that it was a business arrangement between men, that the wife's position would ultimately be protected by her marriage, that it was not his concern. He wrote that he understood, now, that this reasoning was a way of not taking responsibility from something he had been fully capable of taking responsibility for. He wrote that he was sorry. He included, at the bottom, a line that said his attorney had advised him not to send this letter and that he was sending it anyway, because his attorney's advice was probably correct in a legal sense and certainly wrong in a human one. Rachel read it twice. She set it down on Vivian's desk. Vivian read it. She set it down. She looked at Rachel. Well, Vivian said yes. Rachel agreed. There was a long pause. What do you want to do with it? Vivian asked. Rachel thought about Gerald Crane, 61 years old, sitting in San Antonio, writing a letter his attorney told him not to write. She thought about the decision. That letter represented not a legal decision, not a strategic one, but a human one. The kind that doesn't help your case and doesn't protect your position, but that you make because it sums the distance between who you are and who you want to be becomes too uncomfortable to maintain. She understood that decision. She had made versions of it herself. Nothing, she said. We don't need to do anything with it. The settlement is signed. His exposure is a separate matter, and it doesn't involve me. She paused. But I'd like to write back. Vivian blinked. You want to write back to Gerald Crane? I want to acknowledge it, Rachel said. He didn't have to send that. He did it knowing it was the wrong move legally. I'm not going to pretend I didn't receive it. Vivian looked at her for a long moment. You are a more complicated person than most people I work with. I've been told that, Rachel said. She wrote the response that evening in Caroline's kitchen, by hand on plain paper. She did not write much. She wrote that she had received his letter, that she understood what it had cost him to send it, and that she was not in a position to offer absolution for decisions that had materially harmed her and her mother's legacy. But she wrote that she had heard him. She sealed it. She sent it, and then she sat at Caroline's kitchen table and thought about what came next. Because the settlement was signed, and the documents were filed, and the divorce would be finalized in 30 days, and what she had been working toward for 5 weeks was, substantively, complete. The case was not there. Were still proceedings that didn't involve her.
The Crane connection and the securities questions, and whatever Victor Hargrove's attorneys decided to pursue.
Those things would unfold on their own timeline, and she would be asked to provide information when needed, and otherwise she would not be at the center of them. She was no longer at the center of anything except her own life. She sat with that. It should have felt larger, she thought. It should have felt like a specific moment, a door closing, a chapter ending with a sound she could hear. Instead, it felt quiet. The particular quiet of something that has been running very loudly for a very long time that has simply finally stopped. She thought about what she had told Daniel in the conference room. I want to walk away from this with enough to build something of my own. She had the resources now. The settlement, the cash payment, her career, the professional credibility she had maintained throughout all of it, without ever allowing what was happening in her personal life to compromise what she delivered in her professional one. She had the clarity she had found in the first week of her investigation and had not lost. She realized everything she needed. The question was what to do with it. She thought about the conversations she'd had with clients, over the years women often, who came to her firm, with financial situations that were more complicated and more dire than they appeared on the surface. Women whose names weren't on accounts they should have been on. Women whose understanding of their own financial position was significantly less complete than their husbands'. Women who found themselves at 40 or 50 or 60 looking at a life that had happened largely without their full participation in the decisions that shaped it. She had always helped those clients as efficiently and professionally as she could. She had never thought of herself as one of them, until she had found a hotel receipt in a jacket pocket and opened it in a well-lit hallway and understood with the precision of someone who reads numbers for a living that she had been exactly one of them for a very long time. She picked up a notepad. She wrote 3 words at the top of the first page. She looked at them. She wrote 4 more. By the time Caroline came into the kitchen at 9:30 to refill her coffee, Rachel had filled 2 pages. Caroline looked at her. What are you doing? Rachel looked up. I'm building something, she said. Caroline looked at the notepad. She read what Rachel had written without asking permission the way sisters do. Then she sat down across from her sister and said, Tell me. And Rachel, for the first time since all of this began, told someone the full picture, not the legal version, not the strategic version, not the carefully maintained professional composure version. The real one. What she had found, what it had cost her, what she had understood about herself in the finding of it, and what she intended to do with everything that came next. Caroline listened without interrupting, which was the most remarkable thing Caroline had ever done in Rachel's experience. When Rachel finished, Caroline was quiet for a long moment. You're going to help other women do what you did, Caroline said. I'm going to help other women understand what they have before they're in a position where they have to fight for it, Rachel said. That's different. That's better. You don't fight as hard when you already know where everything is. Caroline nodded, slowly, thoughtfully, with the expression of someone who is genuinely moved and is trying not to show how much. Mom would have funded this herself, Caroline said. Rachel felt the edge of something sharp and sweet move through her chest. She breathed through it. I know, she said. That's why I'm doing it. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday in January, 31 days after the settlement was signed. Rachel sat in the courtroom and listened to the judge, read the terms into the record, and she noticed that she was not holding her breath. She had expected to be holding her breath. She had expected some version of the emotional weight she had been bracing for throughout this entire process. The fossil, the last door. The official closing of a chapter that had taken 12 years to write and 5 weeks to dismantle. Instead, she sat with her hands in her lap and listened to her name and Daniel's name spoken in the flat procedural language of legal finality. And she felt something she could only describe as ground. Solid, level, the feeling of standing on a surface that will hold you. Daniel was across the room with Calloway. She did not look at him during the proceedings. Not from cruelty, she had moved past the versions of this that required cruelty, but because there was nothing left in that direction that she needed. She had looked at Daniel Whitmore with complete attention for 12 years. She had looked at him with investigative precision for 5 weeks. She had said what she needed to say in a conference room with attorneys on either side of them. She was done looking. When the judge concluded, Vivian put her hand briefly on Rachel's arm. Not a gesture of celebration, something quieter than that, the acknowledgement of a professional who understood what the journey to this moment had actually required. "It's done," Vivian said. "Yes," Rachel said. They walked out together into the January air, and Rachel stood for a moment with her face turned slightly upward, and she breathed in and breathed out, and then she said, "I have a meeting at 2." Vivian looked at her. Then she laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her. "Of course you do," Rachel smiled. "Thank you, Vivian." "For everything. You did the work," Vivian said. "I just knew where to file it." That was generous, and also Rachel knew not quite accurate. Vivian had been precise and fearless, and had moved at a speed that had made the difference between a deal closing and a deal stopping. But Rachel accepted the generosity and the spirit it was offered, because she had learned, in the past several weeks, that accepting what people gave you honestly was its own form of strength. She drove to her 2:00 meeting. The meeting was with a commercial real estate broker named Diane Okafor, who came highly recommended by 2 people Rachel trusted and who had, over the phone, demonstrated an efficient, no-nonsense approach to the task of finding Rachel the right space for what she was building. Rachel had spoken with 4 brokers before Diane. Diane was the only one who had asked, in the first 2 minutes of their initial call, "What does space need to say about you?" Rachel had liked that question very much. They met in a building on South Congress on the 3rd floor in a corner space with good light and enough square footage to be serious without being grandiose. Rachel walked through it the way she walked through everything, methodically, noting what was there and what wasn't, calculating what it would take to turn what existed into what she needed. "How many staff to start?" Diane asked. 2, Rachel said. "Myself and an associate. We'll grow from there. Timeline for opening?" 90 days, Rachel said. "I want to be operational by April." Diane made a note. "What's the firm?" Rachel looked at the empty space. She had been thinking about the name for 3 weeks. Turning various options over with the same care she applied to everything else. She had considered her own name straightforward, professional, the obvious choice. She had considered something more abstract, something that spoke to the nature of the work without being personal. In the end, she had come back to something simple, something that said exactly what she meant. "Whitmore Financial Clarity," she said. "The practice will focus on financial consultation for women navigating significant life transitions. Divorce, inheritance, late-stage career changes. Women who need someone to sit across from them and explain exactly what they have and exactly what they're entitled to." Diane stopped writing. She looked at Rachel. "I'm going to enjoy helping you find this space," she said. Rachel smiled. "Good, let's see the rest of it." 8 minutes audience retention hook. The 90 days that followed were the most purposeful Rachel had felt in years. She gave her notice at Meridian 2 weeks after the divorce was finalized. Gerald Ostrowski took it with the particular equanimity of a man who had seen exceptional people leave before and understood that holding them was not the right response. "I always thought you were running something here that was slightly too small for you," he said. He was not a sentimental man, which was one of the things Rachel had always respected about him. "What's the firm?" she told him. He nodded slowly. "If you need a reference, call me, and when you need to refer something that's above your capacity, call me for that too." "Mutual referrals," Rachel said. "That's how the good ones work," he said. She left Meridian on a Friday afternoon with a box that was smaller than she'd expected, 15 years of her professional life that fit, apparently, into something she could carry with one hand. She stood in the parking garage for a moment, box balanced on her hip, and thought about the last time she'd been in this garage, turning her life over the call with Lauren Hayes, the Vivian texts, the days of sitting in her car running numbers in her head while the engine idled. She had done a lot of important thinking in parking garages. She drove to the new office space, which was now hers. She set the box down on the floor in the empty room. She stood in the middle of it. It smelled like fresh paint and possibility, which was either the most cliched thing she had ever thought or the most accurate, and she decided it was both, and that was fine. Her associate came on board in February. Her name was Simone Adler, 28 years old, fresh out of her CPA certification, meticulous and direct and possessed of the specific quality Rachel had looked for in the interviews, the ability to listen to a complicated situation without letting her own emotional response crowd out the analytical one. Rachel had interviewed 7 candidates. Simone had been the only one who, when presented with a hypothetical case involving a woman who hadn't reviewed her own accounts in 3 years, had said not "that's unfortunate" or "that's understandable," but instead, "Okay, where do we start?" That was the answer Rachel had been waiting for. They spent February building the infrastructure, the compliance framework, the service menu, the intake process, the referral network. Rachel called every attorney, every financial professional, every banker she had worked with or trusted over the course of her career, and she explained what she was building and why, and she asked them to send her the clients who needed it. Almost all of them said yes immediately, because almost all of them, it turned out, had women in their practice who needed exactly what Rachel was describing. Women who were in the middle of divorces or estate settlements or late career financial resets, and who needed someone to translate the numbers into language that felt like truth rather than strategy. The first client walked in on March 3rd. Her name was Patricia. She was 64 years old. She had been married for 38 years to a man who had managed all of their finances with her general awareness, but not her detailed understanding. He had died the previous year, and she was sitting inside an estate that was more complex than she had expected, with an advisor she didn't entirely trust and a son-in-law who had strong opinions about what should happen with the house. She sat across from Rachel in the new office, which still smelled faintly of paint, and she said, "I just need to understand what I actually have. Everything everyone is telling me sounds right, but I can't verify any of it." Rachel looked at her. She thought about her own mother. She thought about Eleanor Whitmore's careful records and her hard-won savings and the trust she had placed in the wrong person's hands. "Then we're going to verify all of it," Rachel said. Together, starting today. Patricia left 2.5 hours later with a clear picture of her actual assets position, a list of 3 questions she needed to ask her estate attorney, and the particular expression of a woman who has been carrying a weight she couldn't fully see and has suddenly been shown where to set it down. Rachel sat alone in the office after she left. She thought about the word that Paul Mara had used in the very beginning, when he was still mapping the shape of what Daniel had done. Reclassified, such a neutral word for such a specific harm. The idea that you could take something real and true and simply call it something else on paper, and by the act of naming it differently, change what it was worth and who it belonged to. Rachel's whole practice, she understood now, was built around the opposite of that. Around the idea that naming things correctly, calling what you have by its actual name, knowing its actual value, understanding exactly where it lives and who controls it, was not a technical skill but a form of protection. A form of power that women had historically been encouraged in various ways not to seek. She was seeking it for herself and now for others. 14 minutes, major twist. The twist she had not anticipated, the one that arrived in the middle of building something new, came in the form of a phone call from Vivian on a Wednesday afternoon in late March. Rachel was at her desk, reviewing Patricia's case notes when the phone rang, and she answered it expecting something routine, a document to sign. A procedural update on one of the ancillary processes that were still working their way through the system. It was not routine. Daniel called Calloway this morning, Vivian said. He's filed a counter motion. Rachel set down her pen. On what grounds? He's claiming that the forensic accounting report contained errors in the valuation methodology and that the settlement agreement was reached under conditions of undue pressure. Vivian's voice was level, which Rachel had learned to read as professional containment of something that required containment. He's asking the court to revisit the ownership percentage. Rachel was quiet for a moment. She was not afraid. She noted that with something like detachment, the absence of fear where fear might reasonably have been, and she cataloged it as information about where she was now versus where she had been in October, standing in a hallway with a hotel receipt in her hand with no idea what she was walking into. What's his actual argument, she said. The motion cites 3 specific line items in Paul's report as methodologically inconsistent, Vivian said. It's not without some technical basis. There are arguments to be made about valuation timing that are genuinely contested in this area of law. But Rachel, this is a delay tactic. Calloway knows that, and I know that, and frankly, I think Daniel knows that. What does he want? I think he wants 32% instead of 40%, Vivian said. I think he watched the business stabilize slightly after the Hargrove situation resolved, and he did the math, and the difference between 32 and 40 at the new valuation number is significant enough that he's willing to try. Rachel turned this over. When's the hearing? 6 weeks. Then we have 6 weeks to make his argument untenable, she said. I was hoping you'd say that, Vivian said. I'll call Paul. Rachel hung up and sat with the development for a moment. She thought about Daniel 7 weeks after a finalized divorce, Daniel in a stabilizing business, Daniel doing the math. She was not angry, she was not surprised. She was, if she was honest, almost respectful of the move in the purely strategic sense, the way you can respect a chess move even when it's directed against you. He was not going to win, but she gave him the professional credit of acknowledging that he had looked for the angle and found him one worth trying. She called Paul herself. I heard, he said before she spoke. How confident are you in the methodology? Completely, he said. The timing arguments they're raising are technically valid in a general sense, but don't apply to this specific situation because of the circular enrichment adjustments. If they want to litigate this in front of a judge, I will enjoy the opportunity to explain that distinction at length. Good, Rachel said. Let's make sure the explanation is airtight. It already is, Paul said, but I'll make it airtighter. She smiled. Thank you, Paul. Rachel, he said. He's not going to win this. I know, she said, and she did know. She had known from the moment Vivian told her. Not from arrogance, not from blind faith in her own position, but from the specific knowledge that comes from having done the work completely. When you have followed every thread and documented every transaction and verified every number, and left nothing unexamined, you do not fear someone poking at the edges of your work. You welcome it, because the edges of work done that carefully hold. 20 minutes audience retention hook. The 6 weeks before the hearing were, paradoxically, among the most productive of Rachel's professional life. She had 7 clients by the end of March, 12 by the middle of April. Vivian had sent her 3 of them directly, women navigating divorces who needed financial clarity alongside their legal representation. 2 had come from Gerald Ostrowski's referral network. 1 had come from a women's professional organization Rachel had spoken at, a 40-minute presentation on financial self-advocacy that had ended with 6 women waiting to speak with her. She worked during the days and prepared for the hearing. In the evenings, reviewing Paul's expanded methodology documentation with the focus she brought to everything she considered important. She slept well, she ate regularly. She ran 3 mornings a week, which she had not done in years because she had found during the worst weeks of the investigation that physical motion gave her thoughts somewhere to go. Caroline called every few days. "How are you doing?" Caroline asked one evening. Honestly, Rachel said, "I'm better than I've been in a long time." Which is strange, given that I'm preparing to go back in front of a judge about a marriage that's already been dissolved. "It's not strange," Caroline said. "You're on solid ground. You know it, he can feel it, and it's making him desperate." "Maybe," Rachel said, "or maybe he just did the math." "Both can be true," Caroline said. "He did the math, and the math made him feel like he had nothing to lose." Desperate people do math too. Rachel thought about that. "You're smarter than people give you credit for." "I know," Caroline said. "It's one of my most useful qualities." The hearing was on a Thursday morning. Rachel dressed the same way she had dressed for the settlement meeting, not performing, not costuming, just the version of herself that showed up completely, since something required complete showing up. Vivian met her outside the courthouse. "Paul is already inside," Vivian said. "He brought supplemental documentation. How much?" 47 pages, Rachel almost smiled. "Good." They went in. Daniel was there with Calloway. He looked better than he had at the settlement meeting. The weight he'd lost had come back slightly, and he was wearing the suit that fit him properly. He looked like a man who had rested and recalculated and arrived with a plan. Rachel sat down and looked at her notes and did not perform confidence, because she did not need to perform it. It was simply there, the way things are there when they've been properly built. The judge was a woman named Honorable Sandra Reeves, who had been on the bench for 14 years and who had, Rachel gathered from Vivian's brief description, a strong preference for getting to the point. She reviewed the counterclaim filing, she reviewed Paul's original report, and then she looked at it at both sides with the expression of someone who has sorted through a great many disputes and has learned to identify quickly which ones have merit. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "your client's motion cites 3 specific valuation methodology points. I'd like your expert to address them directly." Daniel's expert was a man named Dr. Frederick Alston, a credentialed valuation specialist who was articulate and professional and made his 3 points clearly and with appropriate technical grounding. Rachel listened to all of it without expression. She had read all of it already. When he finished, Judge Reeves looked at Paul. Mara Paul stood. He was, as always, quiet and precise and completely without theater. He addressed each of the 3 points methodically. And for each one he explained language clear enough for a non-specialist to follow and specified by technical scrutiny, why the general valuation principle being cited did not apply to this particular situation, given the circular enrichment structure, the related party reclassification, and the specific timeline of the capital movements. He did it in 22 minutes. When he sat down, the courtroom was quiet for a moment. Judge Reeves looked at her notes. She looked at Paul's supplemental documentation, which her clerk had provided. She turned several pages, then she looked up. "I'm going to be direct," she said. "The counterclaim methodology arguments are technically grounded but contextually inapplicable. The valuation in the original settlement reflects a corrected capital structure that the court already accepted as accurate. I don't find a basis to disturb the settlement terms." She set her notes down. "The motion is denied." 3 words, "the motion is denied." Rachel sat very still for a moment. Then she wrote those 3 words on the notepad in front of her, in her own careful handwriting. Not for the legal record, for herself, she wanted to see them in her own hand. 28 minutes. Final major twist. What happened next was the thing Rachel had not predicted. Calloway requested a brief recess, and when they came back, he asked to address the court with a statement from his client. Judge Reeves looked at Vivian. Vivian raised no objection, with the controlled expression of someone who was as surprised as everyone else, but was not going to show it. Daniel stood. He stood without notes, without preparation, or without the visible evidence of it. He stood the way a man stands when he has decided to say something and has accepted that the saying of it is going to cost him something he can't get back. He looked at Rachel, not at his attorney, not at the judge. At Rachel. "I want to state for the record," he said, and his voice was quiet enough that the courtroom had to lean slightly toward it, "that the original settlement terms are correct. The ownership interest reflected in those terms is accurate. My filing of the counterclaim was, he stopped, he took a breath. It was me not being done fighting, and I understand, standing here, that I should have been done fighting significantly before now. Judge Reeves watched him. I built something real, Daniel said. I know that, but I didn't build it alone, and I didn't account for the contributions I relied on, and I constructed a financial that was not honest. Another pause. The settlement is correct. I'm withdrawing the counterclaim. Calloway looked at the table. The courtroom was very quiet. Rachel looked at her husband, her former husband, and she thought about all the versions of Daniel she had known. The young man who had been hungry and driven and had made her believe in something she had wanted to believe in. The man who had made bad decisions and then made more of them, building a structure of concealment that had required increasing maintenance until it required more than he could manage. The man in the kitchen with his hands on the counter, asking, "What do you want?" in a voice that was, underneath all the management, genuinely asking. She did not love him. She had not loved the version of him that had existed for the last several years of their marriage, the version she had not fully known. But she recognized, in this moment, that he was capable of doing this specific thing, this costly, unnecessary, unstrategic thing, and that was worth acknowledging, not to him, not publicly, but inside herself, where she kept the accounting of what was true. Judge Reeves accepted the withdrawal. The hearing concluded. Rachel walked out of the courthouse for the last time, in connection with the marriage that had ended in January, and she stood on the steps with Vivian beside her, and Austin was going about its business around them, completely unaware. And the air had the particular quality of early spring in Texas, warm enough to notice, cool enough to be welcome. That was not what I expected, Vivian said. No, Rachel agreed. How do you feel? Rachel thought about it, the way she always thought about things seriously, honestly, without rushing toward an answer that sounded better than the real one. Finished, she said. I feel finished, Vivian nodded. Good finished or sad finished? Both, Rachel said. The good kind of both. They stood there for a moment. Then Rachel said, I have a client at 2. Vivian laughed again, the same surprised laugh as January. The one that Rachel had come to understand was Vivian's highest compliment, the laugh of someone who genuinely admires a quality they're witnessing. Go, Vivian said. Go build your thing, Rachel went. Audience retention hook final movement. The client at 2 was a woman named Margaret, 57 years old, referred by one of Vivian's colleagues. She had been married for 26 years. She was not divorcing. She was simply, as she explained in the intake call, realizing that she did not know enough about her own financial situation to feel secure in it, and she wanted to change that. Rachel sat across from her and listened to her, describe what she knew and what she didn't, and she asked the questions. She had learned tact, not the ones that made people feel embarrassed about the gaps in their knowledge, but the ones that mapped the territory accurately, so you could start from where you actually were. And she thought while she listened about Eleanor Whitmore. Her mother had kept every record, had saved every dollar with intention, had built something out of patience and discipline she believed would protect the people she loved. It had not protected Rachel in the end because Rachel had trusted someone else to manage what her mother had built. But it had given Rachel the inheritance of a way of thinking. A way of looking at numbers as information rather than abstractions. A way of understanding that clarity, real, specific, unambiguous clarity about what you have and what it's worth and who controls it, is not a luxury or a technical skill. It is a form of safety. It is sometimes the difference between a life you inhabit fully and a life that happens to you while you're looking somewhere else. That was what Rachel was building, not just a firm. Not just a practice, a place where the specific, clarifying question her mother never got to ask, and Rachel had to ask too late, could be asked early. Could be asked often. Could be answered completely and correctly by someone who had done the work of understanding both the numbers and the human being sitting across from them. Margaret left at 4:15 with a clear picture of her accounts, a list of documents she needed to consolidate, and the expression Rachel had begun to recognize in her clients, the particular settling that happens when someone who has been carrying uncertainty finally sets it down and finds that what's underneath it is manageable. Rachel sat alone in the office after the last light changed. She thought about October. She thought about a jacket pocket and a folded receipt and 11 minutes in the dark on the edge of a bed that was no longer hers. She thought about the hotel receipt as the beginning of the story, which it wasn't. It was just the moment the story became visible. The story had begun long before that. It had begun in the small daily surrenders, the questions she hadn't asked, the documents she hadn't read, the accounting she had trusted someone else to keep on her behalf. It had begun, possibly, in the moment she married a man who was comfortable, and the moment she allowed herself to become invisible in that comfort, because invisible felt, for a while, like peace. She had found her way back from invisible, not in one dramatic moment, not in a single act of confrontation or revelation or courage. In a series of small, deliberate decisions made in parking garages and late nights, and one conference room after another, each one building on the last, each one requiring her to stay clear-eyed when everything around her was trying to make her feel like she couldn't trust what she was seeing. She had trusted what she was seeing. She had followed every thread. She had built a case from the ground up, the way her mother had built a savings account, dollar by dollar, decision by decision, with patience and precision and the absolute refusal to accept a version of the truth that was less than complete. She stood up. She walked to the door of her office and looked at the lettering on the glass. The firm name she had chosen, her name and the word clarity and the commitment those two things together represented. She thought about Daniel's dare if you're so unhappy, leave spoken with the certainty of a man who had built a maze around her and believed she couldn't find the exit. She thought about what she had found instead, not just the exit. The map, the deed, the truth about every room. Rachel Whitmore turned off the light in her office, locked the door behind her, and walked out into a life that was entirely, unambiguously, completely her own, and she had the documentation to prove it.